Hello, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of On the Line. Today, joining me is Iddo Moed, the ambassador from Israel to Canada. He's been in that post for more than a year and a half after doing stints all over the place, including the Dominican Republic, the Netherlands, all sorts of crazy places. We're going to talk about a lot of issues. Of course, Israel sadly is back in the news again. The ceasefire has broken, and it looks like the IDF is going to pursue more military operations in the Gaza Strip. We talk a little bit about that. We talk about the broader geopolitical situation with the US and Canada. And we talk also a little bit about innovation and things that Canada can learn from Israel as it forces itself to become a much more productive, independent, and innovative nation. All that and more. Follow us on www.readtheline.ca and do check out this week's episode of On the Line with Jen Gerson.
This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Innovative Medicines Canada. With a new government in place, one thing remains clear. Canada must continue to prioritize patients and healthcare innovation. Innovative Medicines Canada is focused on collaborating with all levels of government to improve access to life-saving medicines and develop a healthcare system that prioritizes patients, ignites innovation, and drives economic growth. Canada's innovative medicines sector plays a critical role, not just in health outcomes, but in keeping us competitive on the global stage. That's why, even during a moment of political change, Innovative Medicines Canada is staying focused on the issues that matter most to Canadians. And as Canada moves forward with national pharmacare, Innovative Medicines Canada believes it's possible to expand access without limiting choice by strengthening what works and fixing what doesn't. Visit innovativemedicines.ca to learn more.
Well, once again, we are here with Ambassador from Israel to Canada, Ambassador Iddo Moed. Ambassador, really lovely to have you again, and I really wanted to appreciate the fact that you have now sat down with me twice, because we actually had an interview literally just before the writ dropped in Canada, and I did warn you that there was a chance that interview was going to be put on pause simply because the election was going to eat our lives, and lo and behold, the election then did eat our lives. So it's been about, 6 weeks since we last spoke, I believe? And the world has been remade twice over since then. So before we get into it, I'd like to just sort of get our listeners caught up on the news and the situation in Israel, particularly the situation with Israel and Gaza, because I know certainly my attention span was directed elsewhere with the election here in Canada, and I'm sure that many of our listeners' attention spans were likewise directed elsewhere. So just can you give us just a quick overview about the state of play since we last spoke? What is the situation with Gaza right now?
Let's imagine those 6 weeks where the world has spun around twice over. Mm-hmm. What happened for the 59 hostages that have been there for almost already, getting closer to 2 years in the dungeons underneath Gaza. So they're still there, and we are trying to do whatever we can to get them out. They want to get their lives back. We want to get, of course, to recreate a stable situation in the region. But as long as Hamas is there, we just have to continue to press and do whatever we can to extract the hostages. And so when we recently published the latest data about UNRWA and the fact that they have been playing such a prominent role in supporting Hamas, in supporting terrorism, in supporting all of the causes of October the 7th, we actually meant that when we are talking about a reality change in Gaza, we are very serious about that. So we need to get our hostages back, but we need also to make sure that Hamas cannot be part of the future of Gaza in any way, shape, or form, cannot threaten Israel in any way, shape, or form. And I think that is also where we find ourselves in the same spot where Canada has been. But when we are talking specifically about humanitarian aid, and we see how
let's put a pin in that, because I think we're going to delve into all of that in a little bit more detail. But first, I wanted to ask. So my understanding, although I don't know the details of this, is that there was a hostage deal between Hamas and Israel that more or less didn't pan out. Can you give us an overview as to what happened there?
Hamas has one specific goal. They want to stay in power. So when they condition a hostage deal on staying in power and continuing to be able to shoot into Israel, which they have done actually also in the past few weeks that we spoke about, that's of course not a possibility for Israel. We outlined 3 goals for this war, and 2 of them relate to Hamas, 1 to the hostages, and so we can't trade them off. This is that threat that emanates from Hamas is very, very serious.
Sure, but what specifically went wrong with that last hostage deal? Did Hamas break the hostage deal, or why did that not go through?
Hamas continue to want to have guarantees to stay in power, and that's impossible, of course. That's impossible.
Okay. And wasn't there a plan to hand over hostages that didn't go through because I think Hamas claimed that there was a military movement by the Israeli Defense Forces?
Hamas they decided that they want to have, before moving any step further, they want to have guarantees for 5 years or 10 years that they can stay in power. Okay. And that's a non-starter, of course. That's a non-starter because when they stay in power, they will continue, as they said, to restart the 7th of October again and again. That's what they said. So that's not a deal. We can't have a deal getting hostages out and Hamas continues to kill Israelis at the same time.
Right. So I believe since we last spoke, a cabinet from the Knesset has put forward a plan where my understanding is that Israel seeks to more or less conquer or control the Gaza Strip. So they're proposing that they would move in, they would be in charge of distribution of all humanitarian aid, and they would essentially run the Gaza Strip. Is that now Israel's goal?
There are discussions within the Israeli cabinet about what are the next steps to move forward with Gaza. The cabinet, the government, is very strong and making sure that Hamas cannot play a role there, and Hamas cannot be, as they have done, seizing the humanitarian aid and controlling Gaza by robbing the convoys that drive into the Gaza Strip and distributing this aid by themselves in order for them to maintain power. That's of course also a non-starter. So we understand that situation requires us to move in and perhaps take over the distribution function that Hamas has been monopolizing. And that's a very serious development, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how things unfold. But at the moment, it seems like there is no other way to get Hamas out than not to allow them to be part of the distribution channel for humanitarian aid for the population that needs it.
So when Israel is talking about moving in to control the Gaza Strip, controlling humanitarian aid, and this is combined with talk from people like Donald Trump trying to essentially say we need to relocate the current occupants, all of this combined starts to give the impression that the end game for Israel is more or less to take over the Gaza Strip, kick out the existing residents, and more or less colonize it. Is that reasonable?
Jen, you know that Israel's power is such that moving into the Gaza Strip with all its complications could have been, if that was the objective, we would have done that in a day or 2 days or whatever. It is small. It's not that's not the issue. It's entirely not the issue, and it's not Israel's objective to conquer the Gaza Strip. But what we are talking about is taking over in the sense that what we've been hoping the international community would have supported, and that is find other channels other than the UNRWA and the Hamas to distribute the humanitarian aid that is necessary for the population. So we are working to support the population. That is a sort of an issue that gets lost in translation. But what we also want to do is to try and support the population. We're not trying to evict them or to conquer and send them somewhere else. And as far as the U.S. plans, I suppose you need to ask President Trump about that. But as far as Israel goes, we want to make sure that Hamas is not there and the hostages are released. And we've been saying this for days and weeks and almost a year and a half, or 2 years almost. If Hamas lay down the weapons, today and they release the hostages today, everything would change in the Gaza Strip for all people there. And they just don't do that.
However, it seems like defeating Hamas is now requiring Israel to effectively move in and take control of the government of the Gaza Strip indefinitely. Is that correct?
We said many times that we'll do whatever it takes to get our people back. It's very simple. We have to have our security back and we have to have our people back. Hamas has vowed to destroy the state of Israel. They tried it on October the 7th. They said afterwards, we'll do it again and again. So we cannot allow Hamas to stay there, and we cannot allow Hamas to keep our hostages. And that is something that, as late as yesterday, Prime Minister reiterated very, very clearly. We will not allow that to happen. So we'll do whatever it takes to change that reality.
Some of the critics of some of Israel's actions right now have claimed that humanitarian aid has effectively been blocked for the last 9 weeks or so, and that there is a starvation crisis in Gaza. I mean, if Israel has chosen to take over humanitarian aid, or the Israeli military has chosen to take control over the humanitarian aid distributions, then the state of humanitarian aid must therefore fall to Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces. So, I mean, what are you guys doing to get aid to the civilian population? And when can that civilian population expect aid to flow over those borders more freely?
So we are working on this on a day-to-day basis, but just broadly speaking, so that our viewers and listeners can get an idea of what Israel is doing. What's Israel's role in humanitarian aid? We have a special unit that deals with international organizations within the Israeli military. And that unit has been operating for many, many years, since long before Gaza issue became an issue. And their role is to make sure that all the international organizations have access into Gaza through our lines, our border with Gaza. Yeah. They have been doing that for many, many years, and they've been working together with all the international organizations. They continue to do that. They know exactly what is the condition in Gaza when it comes to water, sanitation, medical care, food supplies, and so on. They are monitoring it on a constant basis. They publish those data on a constant basis on the website. It's called COGAT, C-O-G-A-T. And they have all the information there. So it's very clear that we are monitoring the situation, making sure that the population will get what they need. And we continue to do that, and this is our obligation, and we continue to uphold that obligation. But
so you're saying the food has been able to get through over the last 9 weeks?
No, I'm saying that we are monitoring the levels of food and whatever humanitarian needs there are in Gaza. But we have a great issue with a problem that we're not there, and Hamas is there to take over all those supplies, to rob it from the population, and we see it. It's very, very violent. And just the other day, there was a horrible clip again of them beating a person in the middle of the street to death almost because he was trying to save some food. So we are trying to do whatever we can to make sure that the population gets whatever they need, not through Hamas, so that Hamas will not play a role in Gaza and threaten Israel and so on.
Is Israel concerned about the level of food in Gaza right now and the food supply to the civilian population?
We are, as I said, we are monitoring it on a daily basis. So we are always concerned about that.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the other thing that has happened in the world since we last spoke, which is Liberation Day and all the fallout as a result of that. I mean, we spoke before in our previous interview. I kind of asked you this question, and I'd like to re-ask you this question in light of what's happened since, and that is, when we see America turn against Canada, threaten our sovereignty, impose, and right now, tariffs on our auto sector, for example, this is how America is treating one of its oldest and closest and most integrated friends. I mean, I have to turn the question to you. I can't think of another country that's more dependent on American goodwill than Israel. Do you still believe that America is a trustworthy ally and will continue to be a trustworthy ally to Israel in the long run, especially considering since Liberation Day, we believe that Donald Trump has imposed 17% tariffs on Israel, and I think that well, we can get into this more, but there have been some statements leaked to the press from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressing some pretty significant dissatisfaction with Trump's policies in the Middle East. So what is your thinking about the relationship that you have with America right now, given what's happened to Canada and other allies?
There are two separate issues, of course. Although it's the same United States, from our perspective, the United States has been the strongest, staunchest ally of Israel throughout the years, and have come through from October the 7th, most specifically. In any way, shape, or form, Israel needed support with military, political, whatever we needed. The United States has been there very strongly, very closely, whether it's President Biden or President Trump. And President Trump, even before coming into office, made sure that hostage deal came through, where we released 34 hostages. It was very important, very meaningful for Israel. So his support is unwavering, and there is no doubt about that. And he's also working very closely with Israel to make sure that Iran will not pose a threat to Israel, will not get access to nuclear weapons, which is extremely important and very threatening. Iran has been behind all of this war in the Middle East, creating 7 different fronts to attack Israel since October the 7th. So the United States has been there for Israel. There is no daylight between us in whatever area it is. When it comes to tariffs for Israel, of course, they have a meaning, they have significance. We have dropped some of our tariffs on our side even before Liberation Day, and we are continuing our discussions with our U.S. partners to talk about what is the significance of the new tariffs, and how do we work also to make sure that both our economies are not suffering under this new situation. And I think we find a lot of common grounds to move that discussion forward. We are far from resolving it. It will take some time, but that's the way it works. We accept that. We also understand where the United States is coming from when it comes to these tariffs. So we will continue those discussions, and I have no doubt that we'll resolve them very quickly.
I mean, with respect to Bester, if there's one word that I would be hesitant to use when describing Donald Trump specifically, and maybe even America more generally, it's unwavering. We've seen Donald Trump waver specifically back and forth in terms of how he's treating both his allies and his adversaries. Is there no concern or discussion within Israel about diversifying its own base of support, both military and humanitarian aid support, with an understanding that it's very possible that the Americans can prove to be less faithful, less reliable allies than they've been to date?
President Trump has come through for Israel during his previous administration, when he brokered the Abraham Accords, which changed the face of the Middle East, and actually were for us during this war a game changer. It's very, very significant game changer. So our experience has been that he's there for Israel. He means what he says what he means. And so when we have differences of opinion, and we have them, like with any friend and ally around the world, and any friends, we have our ways to work them out and work through them. And so in this specific issue, when it comes to the tariff, for us, it's different in our perspective when it comes to the bilateral relations with the United States. And we have absolutely no doubt about the friendship of the United States towards Israel.
I mean, I was just reading the Times of Israel, and it sounds to me like, it looks like there were some leaks to the press that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed some frustration with the Americans, specifically on their decision to sort of restart a nuclear deal with Iran. There are some concerns about the degree to which Trump sort of, I think, carelessly praised Turkish President Erdogan right in front of Benjamin Netanyahu, knowing, probably oblivious to the fact that there was tension between those two leaders, and also the removal of U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. I mean, all of these things I think are quite legitimate concerns for Israel to have, particularly the nuclear deal. Is that not raising some alarm bells for you guys in terms of your relationship, especially in addition to the tariffs?
There are so many fundamental agreements between Israel and the United States on so many areas that have been has been there for many years and have actually solidified our relationship, that we are not worried when we have some issues with some of the aspects of U.S. policy. We raise those concerns mostly in closed doors, behind closed doors, and we find our counterparts always very much listening. And again, we will not always agree. We know that's how the things work around the world. So it's not always to our 100% satisfaction. But the point really is that when it matters for Israel, it matters for Israel's security, for Israel's stability, for Israel's prosperity. The United States is there more than 100%. And that is so significant. It is hard to describe that when we are talking about a small nation, the only democracy in the Middle East that is surrounded by some countries that their object, like Iran, that their objective is to destroy the state of Israel. It is hard to comprehend how important it is to have an ally like the United States, and to put into perspective those minor disagreements that we may have on some of the issues. This is existential for Israel. And therefore, we see every day the solid support the United States provides for Israel, which is so crucial for our existence. And therefore, I would say that when it comes to the approaches to specific deals, the tactics of things, we have a way to relate that to the U.S. side, and we continue those discussions all the time.
Well, I think that's pretty much gets us. I think that gets us caught up on the current events, at least since the writ dropped. At least since the writ dropped. Sorry. I think that for our listeners, we're going to continue after the break to talk about some of the more general things that the ambassador and I discussed a few weeks ago, which I still think has some salience and resonancy at the moment. Resonance. Struggling to talk first thing in the morning. I'm sorry, but thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us. I really do appreciate your time, and thank you again for taking a second trip around the block with us just to get us caught up, considering the delay between our first interview and our second. So, again, thank you for the Ambassador for joining us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Right off the bat, I'm going to make a confession to our audience, and that is we are here recording this podcast on March 18th of 2025. And right now, our hope is to get this podcast up within a week, unless, of course, the writ drops and Canada might be in an election in the next 5 seconds, in which case you might be seeing or hearing this podcast a week, even 2 or 3 weeks after we've recorded it. So I'm going to start this off right off by saying we're going to talk a little bit about current events as they are current on March 18th, but we know that events might be moving very, very quickly because, of course, as we're recording, we're hearing that the ceasefire has been called off in Gaza. It looks like some kind of military operation is resuming in Gaza. And I think that the rationale for this has been that the Hamas Authority or Palestinians have been slow to return hostages and therefore haven't met their end of the ceasefire agreement. That's my understanding, and that Israel has decided to move forward with some kind of military operation with the blessings of the United States. The nature of that military operation, as of recording, is still unknown. My understanding is that ground forces are not being staged at this point, but we might be seeing some form of airstrikes happening. Is my understanding of this correct?
Yes, it's pretty accurate. We have in Gaza, as we all know for a very long time, we're dealing with a terrorist organization. So they attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, killed more than 1,200 Israelis, abducted 251 of them, and all in an effort to annihilate the state of Israel. And so since then, we've been fighting, and we've been able to retrieve some of the hostages ourselves. At most part, they came out through any kind of agreements or framework agreements we had negotiated through interlocutors, Egypt and Qatar. At some point in time, very recently, Hamas decided to, stop their end of the deal. Actually, they were not really living up to their end because, as you saw, when they released hostages came out, they were humiliated, they were treated horribly. not just during captivity, but even the ceremonies that were held were really there to humiliate them and to denigrate them. And it was, I mean, if there is anything like international law that we think is the way to organize the world, when there are terrorist organizations that have nothing to do with that, that's the kind of reality we are living in. This is what we get. So we have decided, since our goal was to eliminate Hamas, to make sure they're not part of the government, to get all our hostages back, since all of these three still continue to exist, with Hamas actually stealing the humanitarian aid that has been increasingly going into the Gaza Strip. They've been using that, to strengthen their position, to be able to sell it on the street so that they can pay their terrorists on the streets and so on. We decided we have to take action. I mean, there are still 59 hostages held in Gaza, half of whom are alive, and we'll do anything that's in our part to extract them, to get them out of Gaza as soon as possible.
And
so
does Israel know that those
decided
59
to move to military action?
Sorry, does Israel know for certain that those 59 hostages are still alive?
We know that about half of them are alive. And we know also that a significant number of them, unfortunately, are dead. We have been able to establish that through all kinds of evidence that we have collected. But nevertheless, those families deserve closure, and they need to have their loved ones back home, dead or alive. But that is something that the Israeli government is entirely committed to do as soon as possible.
So, the situation has been at a ceasefire for about 2 months between Israel and Gaza. Has there been any progress in that 2 months toward finding some kind of longer-term solution, or a longer-term peace solution that both sides could potentially live with in the long term? Or has the last 2 months just been a pause in the inevitable violence?
It was a framework that was supposed to help us to get our hostages back. And we, of course, were very disappointed to discover that Hamas only used that to strengthen itself. Actually, since the last hostages came out, which were 4 bodies of hostages that were killed during captivity by Hamas, since that time, more than 2 weeks passed. So Hamas got an extra 2 weeks of ceasefire without them doing anything from their side to show any kind of goodwill to end this. So Hamas is still adamant at destroying Israel. They've been rearming themselves. Actually, we started this operation now because we had evidence that they're about to attack Israel. So we don't see Hamas, we don't have any expectations from them. We have expectations from Palestinians, but Palestinians are not able to take control of their lives because Hamas is there. Hamas will use any violence that they have in the past, any violence against their own population, to remain in power. That was actually Yahya Sinwar's strength. He himself killed and maimed Palestinians who he thought were collaborating with Israel. So
is there a cohesive power structure in Hamas right now? I mean, is there because my understanding is that Israel has eliminated almost all of the top Hamas leaders at this point. Is there actually a coherent power system happening in Hamas, or is it just everyone out for themselves?
There is some organization left over. Sinwar's brother is still alive, and he's actually sort of leading the organization. So it's still there.
Okay. So my understanding is that Israel's goals were twofold. The first was to eliminate Hamas as an effective fighting force. It sounds like that goal has not been met. Is that correct?
That's correct. All 3 of them. So eliminate Hamas as a military threat, governing the Gaza Strip, release of the hostages.
So I guess the question for a lot of people who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause would be, is what kind of cost is Israel willing to impose upon the civilians of the Gaza Strip in order to meet those ends? And, I think a lot of people have been looking at several, now more than a year of hostilities and, images of children, innocent children who have been harmed as a result of the operation. Is it possible actually to fully eliminate Hamas? And what will ultimately be the civilian toll of that elimination?
It's a very important question that is being asked repeatedly in Israel. We look at the Palestinian population in a way that I don't think many people appreciate in other countries, but we look at them as neighbors. And the fact that they are being held captive by Hamas, and the fact that they are not being able to use for themselves to develop their own democratic society and organizations and voices and all of that, I don't think that people really appreciate this here. Palestinian people have been bred by hatred. The organization we know as UNRWA is actually a terrorist organization in a sense that it bred hatred in the school books. So the Palestinians view Israel as an enemy, and so therefore they are very eager to join any kind of force that will fight Israel. And that is wrong. Until October the 7th, Israel had great relations with many Palestinians. Israelis that were murdered on October the 7th were actually those who drove personally. Vivian Silver. I mean, you have her picture here next to me. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but I just want to show this. Vivian Silver lived next to the border with Gaza. She herself was taking her car on weekends, drove to the border, picked up Palestinian kids to drive them to Israeli hospitals for medical treatment. It took 3 weeks to identify the remains of her body that were so badly mutilated that it was unrecognizable. So the fact that Israelis still believe in peace and coexistence with Palestinians doesn't mean that we will not do everything to get our hostages back. But it also doesn't mean that we will inflict horrible harm on the Palestinians. And our military guidelines tell us that we have to make sure that innocent people stay out of harm's way. And we will continue, we have done that, and we will continue to do that. And just to share with you and the audience that Israel has legal experts embedded in combat units to make sure that decisions that are made prior to being executed are in accordance with international law. And that is very unique because I don't think that many combat units around the world have that. So the commander, because in essence, humanitarian law is about the decision timing. What was the information available? What have we done to make sure that all precautions were taken before we attack? And so there is a legal expert next to the commander who will ask him that question and will want to know whether he was able to abort an attack because the last minute he saw that there were some innocent bystanders. And we have done that, and we have also some footage that we shared occasionally to show that this is exactly what we did. We want to keep innocent civilians out of harm's way. Not only that, not only during combat, we want to help our neighbors to develop a sustainable society so they can live in peace side by side with Israel. This is what we've been doing up until October the 7th.
Well, I mean, I'm not an international lawyer and I'm not on the ground, so I feel very ill qualified to ascertain or judge the degree to which Israel is meeting its international obligations in terms of its conflict in Gaza. And I feel very ill qualified to say whether or not the response has been proportionate or disproportionate to date. I'm not on the ground enough or there to make that assessment for myself. So I want to just wave the white flag on that one to my audience and to you on that. But I do think from where I sit here in Canada, one thing that is very tragic and disheartening is that I don't have a sense from Israel that anyone, either the Palestinians or the Israelis, has a vision of how to get back to a point where there is something resembling not just peaceful coexistence, but also a viable economic future for the people, for the Palestinians who are on the Gaza Strip. I mean, right now, we know that, of course, Donald Trump has proposed essentially ethnic cleansing as a solution to the situation on the ground. And we're going to talk about Donald Trump and the broader geopolitical situation, I think, in our next segment. But is that something that Israelis are discussing and concerned about? Like, you know, we can talk about the short-term military objectives of trying to eliminate Hamas, but what is the long-term plan here? What is the vision for a peaceful future where Israel and the Palestinians aren't engaging in this brutal cycle of violence every 15 to 20 years?
I'll tell you, Jen, I would love to share with you a long and broad answer to this question. And it's ready. But I think it's more important for everyone to know right now what is the mindset of Israelis when we are speaking today on March 18, 2025. After a year and a half, after the longest war and the most horrific attack against Jews or Israelis ever took place. And our sense is that, first and foremost, we have a right to our ancestral land, and we have a right to live there in security and in peace. I mean, no one should be able to threaten our lives there to any extent. And so our right to security is something that is so prevalent right now and is so, in many people's minds, volatile, that we are not ready to discuss how we live in peace with the Palestinians. Because it's quite a narrow aspect of our coexistence in the Middle East. Jews and Arabs in the Middle East have had sometimes good relations, sometimes bad relations. Let's look at how Israelis live together. Jews and Arabs in Israel, Christians, Druze, Bedouins, Caucasians, people from all kinds of faith and beliefs. And as hard as it is to imagine, they live in peace in Israel. You don't hear about any war or clashes inside Israel. Nothing, actually, for many years. And why is that?
There's tensions in the West Bank.
Tensions in the West Bank.
Yeah, and there's been conflict and violence there.
Yes, but I'm talking about Israeli citizens. People on the West Bank are not Israeli citizens. The Israelis there, that's one thing. But people that are Israeli citizens within the Israeli citizenry, there is the understanding that our country, Israel, is a country where all of us have space to live in. None of the groups that I mentioned, the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, the secular Jews, the Druze, the Christians, the Bedouins, and others, none of them are really very happy about their lives. All have qualms, all have complaints, but they all know that it's a democracy. And all of them have direct access to the Supreme Court or to the Knesset or to the government or to anything. And all of them are involved in all parts of life in Israel. So within Israel, we have peace. That's what I'm trying to say. We have peace between Jews and Arabs.
Doesn't that suggest that maybe one of the answers here would be to extend citizenship to all members who live within Israel, the people who have the West Bank and Gazans?
Great question. Then comes in the question of territory. The question of territory about the West Bank, about Gaza. So we left Gaza. At some point in 2005, Israel left Gaza and said, that's not Israeli territory. Let Gazans decide for themselves their future. Not only that, we encourage the international community to donate money to Gaza as much as possible. They had an airport, they had a port, but instead of developing themselves as a kind of a Riviera or any kind of utopic idea that all of us were hoping they will be doing with all that money that was flowing in, all of it disappeared underground to tunnels for Hamas or to the pockets of those rich who were living in huge villas on the beaches of Gaza. Those, of course, were also destroyed when the war broke out. So something went wrong there. What went wrong is that Hamas took over. And if you talk about the West Bank, you have terrorist organizations there. You have Hamas there that's actually holding the majority. And you have Fatah movement, which is also a terrorist organization that has been actually managing Palestinian Authority, but never with an intent to recognize Israel's right to exist. So in Israel, you have different opinions about Palestinian self-determination, but you have different opinions. And the government decides at the end of the day. The government decided to give the Palestinians a chance to develop their own independent life and sovereign life at the end of the way. And that didn't materialize. And it did not materialize because on the Palestinian side, there was never really a strong popular movement to say, we recognize Israel's right to exist and we will coexist with Israel. It was actually support for Hamas. And Hamas was their charter is, and from the river to the sea, that is exactly what Hamas has written in its charter. When that's chanted in the street, these are Hamas operatives that are calling for the annihilation of the state of Israel.
Is there any alternative popular civilian, or is there any other alternative power option than Hamas in the West, in the Gaza Strip at the moment? Yeah,
there must be, and it's not up to Israel. I mean, I would love to say, and I would like to point my ideas, my opinion, but I would love to hear a Palestinian talk about that. And I've met many Palestinians who are very intelligent and bright and feel that, Israel, of course, is Israel. Israel is their neighbor, but they don't get to lead the country. I met a lot of Arab colleagues from countries further than the Palestinians, from the Gulf, or from Egypt, or from Jordan, countries with which we have diplomatic relations and with which we are at peace. And they also wouldn't know who on the Palestinian side would be leading a peace movement. But there's no one. Anybody who wants to be popular on the Palestinian side is one that supports the annihilation of the state of Israel. So just one more sentence about Gaza and the living conditions of most of them. They are so-called refugee camps. And they're held in those conditions because UNRWA, that organization that is supposed to support them, has held them there and never let them leave those conditions because they were supposed to go back into what Israel is, because they were supposed to annihilate the state of Israel. Because in their eyes, in their minds, also of UNRWA, Israel doesn't really have a right to exist as the homeland of the Jewish people.
Now, I recognize that UNRWA is a problematic organization. I have seen I myself have seen the evidence that UNRWA was teaching Palestinians to engage in terrorist activities at a young age, that was part of their school curriculum. And also, I think it's now been well documented that there were employees within UNRWA who did engage in violence and who were complicit in the violence in October 7th. So I can understand why Israel passed the laws that it did in order to cease their support for UNRWA and cease allowing UNRWA to continue to provide aid through their crossings. However, the other flip side on that would be, perhaps the middle of a war when bombs are dropping out of the sky is not the moment to be cutting off any kind of aid to the Palestinians, especially a support or an avenue for aid that is so crucial to the Palestinians, and especially for no other reason than the optics of it don't look great. When you have news reports coming out warning of food shortages in parts of the Gaza Strip, when you have news reports coming out, and I do recognize as well that there have been there's been dispute about the degree to which aid is actually reaching Palestinians, but nonetheless, there have been lots of reports about accusations that the IDF, for example, has cut off certain areas at certain points of time from food aid when in places in the Gaza Strip where there was active fighting happening. Wouldn't it have been perhaps wise to just hold off until after the major military operations ceased before having a conversation about the role of UNRWA in the Gaza Strip?
Let's put a few more ingredients in what you just portrayed. One is that Hamas is actually in control of the aid that flows in. Israel facilitates the flow of aid into Gaza, but is not responsible for its distribution. Distribution happens through all kinds of organizations, but at the end of the day, Hamas controls. Hamas can hijack those convoys and have done so, and I think many of us have seen those militants on top of those trucks, and they take those trucks into their own warehouses, and that's where they keep it, to sell it, to regain their momentum and their power among Palestinians. So that's one thing. The other one is that UNRWA is not the only organization. Actually, UNRWA is responsible for about somewhere between 10 and 15% of the humanitarian aid that goes into Gaza. That is the only proportion. That's as small as it is. The World Food Organization, the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, the World Food Program, and many other organizations are there to distribute the international aid. And so we've actually set up a working group, a team that works on the crossing or just adjacent to the crossing to coordinate the flow of international aid with all these other organizations, including NGOs and so on, and volunteering organizations, to make sure that as much as possible international aid flows into Gaza. Now, since we started the latest framework with the release of hostages and so on, about 22,000 truckloads flowed into Gaza. So all of that to say that there is enough aid. I mean, it's bad. Gaza is not in a good shape in any way, shape, or form.
No one would be claiming at this point that Gaza is a 5-star hotel for anybody living in it.
But people have access to food, and people have access to assistance that they need. All of that is there. The question is, who controls it inside Gaza? Mm-hmm. When Israel is holding a military operation, we first make sure that no civilians are around. So we're not cutting off military humanitarian aid when we are attacking a specific area. We do the contrary. We first drop leaflets. We tell the populations, leave this area, we are about to attack. Then we also, as much as possible, facilitate a corridor for them to leave, and we also tell them which way to go so they'll be safe in that area as well. So we do whatever we can to protect civilians, innocent civilians, and make sure that they're out of harm's way. But having told all this long story, there is one huge thing that is extremely important and we very often fail to think about. And that's 59 hostages that are being held by Hamas under the ground. And I mean, not to speak of the horrific conditions they're being held in. I mean, we just heard the stories of getting one biscuit a day and a bit of salty water to survive on. And it's just unimaginable how these people survived just because they were extremely strong young people. They managed, but they were wounded and they were abused and they were humiliated and hurt and so on. Nobody cares about their humanitarian condition. Red Cross never had access to them. Actually, you know that two of the hostages, when they were brought back, they were actually transmitted from Hamas to the Red Cross. They drove them to the Israeli checkpoint. On the way, one of the hostages asked the Red Cross, "Where were you? Where were you?" And they said, whatever they said, that Hamas didn't let us. But nobody really thinks about the plight of the hostages. So there is an issue here. Israel wants to extract those hostages. If Hamas releases those 59 hostages today, everything is over. They could have done so on the 8th of October. They could have done so on the 21st of October. That's the date that Israel actually started the military operation in Gaza.
But that's not strictly true, because also Israel also said that part of their military operation is explicitly to eliminate Hamas. So if they had just handed over all the hostages on day 2, there still would have been military operations in the Gaza Strip, would there not have been?
The operation started on the 21st or the 23rd of October. So had they turned over the hostages, I think everything would have looked different. Very different, significantly different.
Well, and one thing I can say is, as from my own visit to Israel, is I do think that, we in Canada and we in the West really fail to appreciate the psychological and emotional impact that the hostages have had on the Israeli civilian population, and how much pressure that is on the Israeli government to secure some kind of safe passage for those hostages. And it's a huge push factor in a lot of the decisions that are getting made. And I think that is poorly understood here in the West. But I want to put a pin in that because, as I said earlier, we're getting into current events. And I am concerned that current events may outpace us. And I do think we have a couple of really interesting conversations to get into that are a bit broader and a bit bigger than that, about America, about Canada. So I'm going to put a pin in that right there. I'm going to say like and subscribe. Meet us at www.readtheline and keep following for more, because I'm going to continue our conversation with Ambassador Moed right after this break. Ambassador, thanks for joining us again. I want to pivot a little bit. I think that we cannot avoid talking about the impact of the election and inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump. I think that has radically shifted the entire geopolitical conversation, not just for Canada and Europe, but also for Israel as well. It was my sense when I was in Israel, and I think it's been my sense since, that many Israelis were very happy and excited to see Donald Trump come into office, because there was an assumption that there would be someone stronger and more overtly pro-Israel in the White House. And I think that to date, that presumption has proved to be true. Here's my question to you, is that we have seen that Donald Trump has turned on Canada, its lifelong economic and political ally. We're seeing J.D. Vance give terrible talks to the Europeans, basically telling them to screw off or sod off. I think that the message from the administration has been extremely explicit and extremely clear that traditional allies cannot rely on the United States to be a guarantor of their security. I can't think of a single nation that is more dependent on the United States for support in a very precarious, very difficult security environment than Israel. I mean, right now, Trump appears to be highly supportive of Netanyahu and Israel. My question to you is, can you trust that to be the case tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? And is the fact that the United States is proving to be a very unreliable ally a concern in Israel?
President Trump made a huge difference for Israel in his first term. The Abraham Accords came into being through his doing. So he actually brokered something that was actually in the pipeline for a long time, but he made a difference so that the leaders of Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Morocco came together and signed an agreement that actually changed the face of the Middle East as we know it, and that has withstood the hardest test of it all, the recent war in Gaza and in Lebanon. So I think that in doing that, he made clear to Israel that he's the strongest ally. He sees Israel's security and future peaceful coexistence in the Middle East front and center for him. And we see today, we see how he speaks about Iran going nuclear, which is unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. We see involvement directly with the Houthis, making sure that they not only not threaten international trade system and route as the Red Sea, but also don't pose a threat to Israel. And most importantly, we see that his involvement, even before, just prior to becoming president, made a difference for the release of tens of Israeli hostages held in Gaza. So for Israel, it's a huge blessing, and we are very grateful for that.
Can you trust America more than Canada could?
There is, in international politics, we like to draw parallels and we like to compare. But at the end of the day, we are different parts of the world. We have different set of relationships. And so I wouldn't like to say anything about that. I would think that what we sense in Israel is very clear. President Trump is there for Israel unequivocally. He said that to the hostages that he hosted in his office. He said that to the Israeli public when he visited Israel in his first term. And he made that difference through creating the Abraham Accords. So for us, it's very clear.
What are you going to do if he turns on you?
This kind of hypothetical questions is not something that is relevant in any shape or form. I mean, tomorrow, everything can change. The whole world can change. We know and we hear President Trump looking into Israel's future and the future of the Middle East, that he wants peace and security for Israel. And he means it. And he does whatever is necessary to attain it. So we have all the confidence in President Trump and his intentions for Israel.
So one of the things that Trump has proposed is a program of essentially removing Gazans from the Strip. Essentially, he's proposed ethnic cleansing, removing Gazans. I believe the latest report that I've run into, and again, this is being recorded on the 18th, is that Netanyahu has even demonstrated some support for a plan to remove Gazans to Syria. Is this serious? Is this a possible long-term solution to the cycle of violence in the Gaza Strip?
I think that President Trump later said that he doesn't mean moving anybody by force from Gaza, but what he's essentially saying is that we can't continue to do the same thing and expect different results. And I think that makes sense to a lot of people. And therefore, the Arab League and the Arab countries are working very diligently, very hard to create an alternative program, a plan. And I think that this is where we should be focusing on, because at the end of the day, it's the region that has to take care of all the problems and take responsibility for its security and its stability and its prosperity. And this is why we had the Abraham Accords. And this is why Arab countries are now coming together to think about what can be done to actually eliminate the security threat that Hamas is posing, because it's not just Hamas against Israel, but it's much of this fundamentalism that threatens the region. And we all understand that. We all understand that this is the core of the issue. And actually, that is not only a threat to the Middle East. Fundamentalism and violent fundamentalism and extremism is something that is a source of threat for the whole world. And we see also attacks of against this backdrop around the world. I mean, we see here in Canada also anti-Semitism on an exponential rise.
I'm going to pin on that because I do want to talk about the Canada specific stuff. But I mean, my understanding is that the Arab League has more or less rejected moving people out of the Gaza Strip. And I don't know how you would move 2 million people in that area to a place like Syria except by force. So I don't, it seems to me like this is an idea that has gained traction in Israel. It's not something that has been dismissed outright. And I don't see a scenario where any significant plurality of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are going to pick up roots and go to a place like Syria, for example, which seems to be the country of origin that's being discussed at the moment, unless you make them do it. So we're talking ethnic cleansing as a solution here.
So again, speaking about Israel, even if there are some extremists who would say that's food for thought, I would disagree with you that that's a topic of discussion in Israel. We've had, our relations, our complex relations with our neighbor, with our Arab neighbors for many, many years. And we never thought, and I don't think we will ever think that ethnic cleansing is a potential solution for anything.
So this is this is something that Westerners are perceiving as being realer than Israelis are perceiving as being real.
I think so. And I think that what we are looking at, and this is also what I mentioned to you earlier, is that we're looking at peaceful coexistence in the same way, respectful way that we have within Israel. We have that. And we know that it takes a lot. But just to share one concept, one idea with you, we have in Israel Sharia courts. Many Western countries, when they are talking about, they see Muslim fundamentalism and they're very concerned and thinking about the Muslim court, in having a Muslim court in their countries would be a sort of a threat, perceived as a threat. It's not in Israel.
In fact, it was a controversy here in Canada about 10, 15 years ago.
We have Sharia courts because we also have rabbinical courts for Jews, for family matters. So if we feel, if a community or individual wants to resolve his family issues in accordance with the halacha, with the Jewish tradition, then he goes to a rabbinical court. And the same should be applicable also for Muslims. And so that's possible also for Muslims. And there are qadis. Qadis are Muslim judges, and they rule, and their ruling is fully acceptable within Israeli law. So we understand that it takes some kind of a coexistence, takes some kind of compromise or understanding or respect, which is not always familiar in other parts of the world. And we are in our Declaration of Independence, which is a sort of a charter that is a non-binding legal document, but it's a very clear document that we keep repeating today. We will always guarantee freedom of access, freedom of religion, freedom of everything to anybody all the time, because that's the only way that Israel can continue to be the homeland for the Jewish people. It is a Jewish land, but it is based on Jewish values and norms. And in that sense, we will always have this credo of love thy neighbor as thyself as something that will guide us in our legal system, in our moral values, and also in our action on a day-to-day basis. And yes, there will be extremists, but we have extremists everywhere around the world. And the question is really what prevails. In our case, law prevails, norms prevails, values prevail, and that's what Israel is about.
I want to talk specifically about Canada for a minute here before we move on to some other topics. But one thing that I understand is when the war in the Gaza Strip started, the government of Canada created essentially an emergency program and opened up a temporary visa program for Gaza residents who had family here in Canada. If they wanted to get out of the Gaza Strip on a temporary basis, come stay in Canada while military actions were, I think it was like a temporary 3-year visa, if I recall correctly. The government of Canada opened up this program to about 5,000 potential Gaza residents. We don't know exactly how many people took them up, but it was a very complicated process to get people processed this way. When the war first broke out, a few hundred were able to smuggle themselves out of the Gaza Strip using, nefarious and illegal means to essentially get themselves across the border at Rafa into Cairo for processing their visa applications. And my understanding is a few hundred have made their way over into Canada. But we know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of potential applicants to this program who cannot complete this process or get into Canada because they can't get into Cairo. They can't get into Egypt to continue their visa process. And the major reason why they can't is, of course, because the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt is closed. The IDF, my understanding, the Israelis do have control over that border crossing, and I believe that was still true during the ceasefire, although correct me if I'm incorrect. And so it's my understanding is that the portion of the Israeli government that is charged with overseeing administration of some of these territories were given names of potential Canadian temporary visa applicants, and these people have not been able to legally cross the border into Egypt in order to complete their visa process for many, many months now. Is this something that has been flagged for Israel's attention? Is this something that those visa applicants can expect any kind of reprieve or any way through that border so that they can join their families here back in Canada?
So, Jen, you described a quite complicated process. And,
yes, and yes. Canada has also chosen to make this unnecessarily complicated because it wouldn't be Canada if we didn't demand some impossible bureaucratic nonsense. So I understand that the system is processed, but it sounds to me like at this point the major hurdle is actually physically getting people across the border at Rafa at this point.
So I won't go into details, but I will just say there were two groups that were coming out of Gaza. When the war broke out, there was a group of Gazans with the Canadian nationality. Israel prioritized those and let as many as possible of them leave Gaza unless they were involved somehow with terrorist activity. So that's one group.
Sure. The other one, I'm not talking about that group. That is a different group than what we're discussing here.
Of 5,000 were unable to leave because the crossing was actually closed into Egypt was closed because we were concerned about the terrorists being leaving Gaza, and we were concerned about terrorists coming in, and security concerns, of course, caused us to stop all movement of anyone in or out of Gaza at that point in time. And that is still the case right now. We are aware of the Canadian program. We are also in direct contact with the Canadian authorities to see what can be done to help let those who are able to leave and reach Canada to leave. I'm not going to comment on the Canadian side of this process, how that is and how quickly or slow that is. That's not. But the issue.
I'm assuming the Canadian side of this process is a nightmare. We're just operating on that assumption and moving on.
But as far as the Israeli side is concerned, we have been trying to do our utmost to make sure that Canada gets answers regarding specific individuals who were eligible to leave whenever that was possible. And when it's possible to leave, then those people will be also able to leave. So we are in direct contact with the Canadian authorities on that. But given the security considerations in Gaza, it is very, very difficult to get out right now.
I'm not undermining the security situations, but if Israel is going to move from a ceasefire into, again, an accelerated pace of military operations, is there going to be any opportunity, any period where that Rafa border crossing might be opened so that people who have been flagged by Canada as going through this visa process can get across the border?
So there are a lot of humanitarian issues pertaining to the Rafa crossing. Many people that would like to leave or to enter, by the way, and that is all under consideration. But at the moment, when we are fighting a terrorist organization that is out there to keep hold of our hostages and to actually rearm itself and to prepare for new attacks as they have been doing the last few days, then of course everything else has to be put on hold, and that's the case right now.
Is there a concern that some of those visa applicants going out are illegitimate, or is the concern that by opening the crossing, you potentially will open up the crossing to aid or supplies for Hamas coming back in?
The aid routes or the supply routes are specific. They're not going over the Rafa crossing. There are other crossings where that is managed. So the issue is not the visa program itself. The issue is, of course, the flow of movement of people right now when there is this when there is a war going on, and when we are speaking about terrorists, and we are speaking about the all possible abuse that Hamas is doing in regards to any program that exists. So it's just a very complex situation. Hopefully, the hostages will come out very quickly, and everything else will change. But as long as that is not happening, we have to continue the military operation. We have to, again, make sure that Hamas doesn't pose a threat. They are, and that Hamas doesn't control Gaza. So it all hangs together. We are trying to do our utmost when it comes to all the humanitarian movements. We understand those, and we are every now and then, where possible, we are doing whatever we can, but it's not always possible.
I want to ask one more thing sort of on the geopolitical situation before we switch to a conversation about innovation, which I think is more of an evergreen topic. But there's one thing that both Matt and I have noticed since Donald Trump took office as it pertains to Canada specifically. And it really kind of is raising our eyebrow. Donald Trump takes office. He's threatened us with economic force. He's hot and cold on tariffs. Our economy and our situation is all on tenterhooks as a result of whatever whim is coming out of the White House today. And he's threatened our sovereignty multiple times. He's calling us the 51st state. At first, many Canadians thought that this was a joke. And we kind of treated it as a joke. But I now think it's pretty clear that I don't know whether or not the Americans have the stamina or the organization to seriously pursue this goal. That's, I think, very much an open question. But we know that our now former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was taking this threat to sovereignty seriously. And even if they didn't have the follow through to necessarily annex us outright, they are certainly going to use threats to sovereignty to harm us economically to their own economic benefit, or at least what they believe is their own economic benefit. I mean, a threat of this kind against an ostensible NATO ally, I think is safe to say, is really unprecedented. Of course, Donald Trump's also extended similar kinds of quasi-threats against Panama and Greenland as well. But one thing that I think that we in Canada have noticed, or really, really cannot help but notice, is that the rest of the international community has been really conspicuously silent. We haven't heard very strong support for Canada or Canada's sovereignty, I think, from any other ally. Almost nobody seems to be willing to put their neck out in order to bat Donald Trump in the head and say, this isn't normal, this isn't acceptable, you can't threaten the sovereignty of an ally this way. And I understand that Israel's situation is a bit different than most of our other allies. I can understand why Israel maybe wouldn't be the first country to make that kind of statement on our behalf. But I was wondering, as an ambassador, you're on the circuit, I'm wondering if you can give us some insight. Why do you think our allies have been so silent?
Well,
not to put you on the spot with a really difficult question or anything, but
in our discussions with people here in Canada, of course, we hear that this relationship with the United States is front and center for everyone, and everybody's very occupied with the future of it. And you will understand, of course, if I don't comment on anything that is perceived on the Canadian side or from the international community. But I would say, Canada is very strong, and I've come to be very fond of so many of Canadian traits and capabilities and ingenuity and so on. So I'm sure that the most qualified people here know what to do and come together. And every time there is a challenge for anyone, for any country, something new, then there are solutions, of course. I would say, I can talk about Israel and speak when we are faced with challenges that at the end of the day we are very much solution oriented. So we try to find solutions to the problems we are faced with, whether it's drought, whether it's international markets, whether it's developing products and being more in control of supply chains. Many things that have come to be our strength. So our resilience stems very much from the fact that we have the confidence that we can come out with workable solutions. And I think that this applies to everyone around the world. So yes, there is a new situation here in Canada, but my sense is that at some time in the very near future, things will be resolved and everybody will be happy.
Well, we have a nice American flag behind me. It'll be fantastic. Well, that was a very diplomatic answer, and I appreciate it. I'm going to put a like and subscribe button at the bottom of that thing, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about economic innovation and things of that nature. Get away from the contentious stuff for a little bit. But if you're enjoying this conversation, please do like and subscribe and check us out at www.readtheline.ca. Okay, last segment. We are having a nice long talk, but I'm really interested. I think it's going very well. So we did want to talk about innovations. So I made you sit through the hard stuff before we
That's okay.
get to the more fun stuff. That's kind of how it works sometimes. But again, we are here with Ambassador. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, no,
again, we're here.
Sorry, no.
Yeah. Again, we're here with Ambassador Moed. We're going who is the ambassador from Israel to Canada. You're based in Ottawa, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well that makes sense. Fair enough. So, unfortunately, you missed a beautiful Calgary winter and a terrible Calgary spring, but that's there's no accounting for that sort of thing. So we originally wanted to have this conversation because, of course, Canada's financial situation and economic situation is so precarious right now. Of course, we're very economically dependent on the United States. I think we are being forced to confront the degree to which we are interdependent with the United States. Israel, to its credit, is one of these countries that is in a really rough neighborhood, much rougher than Canada, I must admit. And I don't think anyone would deny that the Israelis and Israel has managed to develop a very sophisticated, very impressive economy on a number of really crucial industries, despite not having anything close to the kind of geographic and just pure mineral and size blessings that Canada has managed to take advantage of. So, I'm wondering, are there obvious economic lessons that we can learn from Israel in terms of making ourselves more independent, more resilient, more economically powerful, more productive, more innovative than we are to date? And just from your perspective, what would some of those things be?
Canada is not for nothing a member of the G7. It's one of the greatest, strongest economies in the world. And it has been like that because Canada is very rich. It has enormous resources to its available to its people, and very smart people and hardworking people. I would say that sometimes we get to situations where somebody else outside pushes us to realize that we actually have all that in our possession, but we don't always align things in a way that works for us in the best possible outcome. So when I'm speaking to counterparts here about collaboration, trade collaboration, or technology and so on, what I see is that Canada is extremely advanced in technology, in artificial intelligence, in quantum research, and many other fields. But it's not always oriented towards solutions. It's not always oriented to commercialize the technology that's been developed, and that is perhaps because of your huge neighbor down south, with which you find very easy way to collaborate and work, and so things go very easy until perhaps at some point they don't. And that's a point to realize that, okay, well, then you should harness all the resources that are at your disposal, and there are so many of them, and do something else with it, do something that really works. And we have in Israel this sort of spirit, what we call the Israeli spirit, and that is that we have to find solutions very quickly, and solutions that really work. And it stems from our security needs. So if you think that you need a solution for a problem and you ask the researcher, how long does it take? And he'll tell you, oh, give me 3 months and I'll come up with a great solution. And you tell them, no, I need it tomorrow morning. And you really need it tomorrow morning. Then he has to work all night and find something that works. So first it doesn't work. And then it takes perhaps instead of 3 months, 2 months. And with time, you get to a new mode that you understand, that you collaborate with others, and that you don't own the whole solution, but you find new ways and networks to collaborate. And there is this ecosystem that we have in Israel. And it's great, not just because we're a small country, but because each and everyone understands that we are part of something bigger. And it's not a community, but it's an ecosystem. So each one has a part in it. Each one of us has a role to play. So coming to that understanding stems from two things. One is that we just know that, horizontally, we have to work. The private sector has to work with the government, the regulators, and the government regulators have to work with the research and development community. And the research and development, of course, is part of the private sector, but also they're independent because that's the academia. And academia understands they have to have applied research on top of basic research. But beyond that, we have also something else. We have this, what I call a vertical ecosystem. So a young man that grows up, goes to school, goes to high school. Let's say he's interested or she's interested in technology, and they may have advanced curriculum at school already. Some of it may be mentored by older young people. Then they complete their studies with some degree of expertise. They go to the military. If they're really good at it, they may pursue this same career in military, maybe even be schooled during military, but then they have hands-on experience. They go to the academia, to the university for the university degree. And then they may join the private sector, the government, and anything else. So they actually grow through the same ecosystem. So it's a crisscross. We understand because we are experiencing the ecosystem. We see the different perspectives. Each and every one of us almost gets the full spectrum of perspectives. And also we understand the need that, it's there. We're small. We have to have results. We are a small country. If we want to be a player in the global market in quantum computing, then we have to have an edge there. How do we pull our resources together? And it works for us. So just as one example, talking about how the cybersecurity ecosystem was set up in Israel. It was Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2011 who actually met the military intelligence unit, and they told him about the threats that emanate from the internet, from the digital domain. And he realized that countries have to be prepared for threats emanating from that. So he pulled a group of 100 researchers headed by Professor Yitzhak Ben Israel from Tel Aviv University. He was head of Israeli military R&D unit, sort of a DARPA, if you may know this term. And he said for a whole year, they came out with a very thick report. But interestingly enough, that report was fully implemented. That doesn't happen very often. We know that. Governments like to have great reports, but then they shelve it. This time, this was implemented. And that meant that there was a unit set up in government that worked together with the private sector and worked together with academia to create an ecosystem that actually was emulated physically in Beersheba, in a city in the south of Israel, and part of it in Tel Aviv. And that's how we spun off hundreds and hundreds of startups, also some huge companies like Checkpoint that are the global leaders in cybersecurity. And that's just one example.
So I mean, what I'm hearing is that Canada's solution for innovation and productivity, where we assign a former Supreme Court justice to head up a 5-year multi-billion-dollar study, in line with the government's favored contractor SNC or whatever it's called this week, in order to do another study to get nothing done, is perhaps not the model that Israel would recommend.
I wouldn't speak about the model. I would speak about the Israeli mentality of can do and have to do. So it can be anywhere. It can be a Supreme Court judge here in Canada or anybody else. But I'm saying that in Israel, what makes this happen is that leaders see the need, they understand there is a way, and they have the will and the resources to apply to implement that plan.
So there's two different things I think that Israel kind of has here that Canada in a weird way doesn't. One is I think that Israel has a very cohesive national identity and a sense of itself as a can-do kind of nation. And the other thing too is Israel is almost constantly beset with real existential crises. And I think these are two things that are just have been, for my life, really absent from the Canadian sense. We've had, if anything, a deterioration of national identity, a deterioration of ourselves as a can-do, plucky nation, and also, we've become fat, rich, and lazy, right? Like we don't, if stuff doesn't get done, it's good enough. It's good enough. We know it's good enough. We've been able to be so dependent on the Americans for so long. We sit on so much material wealth in terms of the resources that we have access to, that if we're not that productive and we're not that innovative, we're still pretty rich. We're still pretty good, pretty well off. But one of the things that really blew me away when I visited Israel was the visit to the Rambam Medical Center. And I didn't write about this in particular because I was writing about lots of other things, but I'll relay the story to the listeners now, is that the Rambam Medical Center, as well facing rocket attacks all the time. I believe in the middle of COVID, was it? No, it was before COVID. I think it was back in 2014, right? The 2014, they were facing rocket attacks from Hezbollah and Hamas at the time. And of course, they were trying to do surgeries and operate on people in the midst of all these rocket attacks. Basically turned the couple of their below ground car parks into fully operational hospitals, radically extending the capacity of the hospital, but also just the sheer logistics involved of moving entire floors of a hospital, patients in critical condition, from one floor to another floor, and to be able to move patients, I think it's in 8 to 12 hours, depending on the patient, to be able to move the entire operation of a hospital underground on short notice. I, as a Canadian, watched that, and that just astonished me, because I was like, we couldn't do this. There isn't a scenario where Canada could move this fast to get stuff done like this at this level. After however many years of COVID, we didn't even manage to expand our intensive care capacity unit over years of a pandemic. The idea that you could just double a hospital's capacity and move it underground over the course of 24 hours is mind-blowing to me as a Canadian. But I think that speaks to there's a different mentality that has to develop under crisis and under duress.
So you probably by now understand I prefer to talk about Israel, but let's talk about Canada for a second.
No, don't.
So, I visited different bunker a while ago, and I must tell you, it's just incredible piece of ingenuity that was put in place, because a very clear threat was to the designers and those who build it. It was clear that there is a substantial threat to the leadership of Canada, and they need to be protected in time of war. And so that bunker was built. And if you walk through it, it's just incredibly smart and ingenious in so many ways, especially given the time that it was built in the 60s. They didn't have the technologies and understandings that we have today, and they have solutions that would work today perfectly well. So it's there. I mean, look at the Arrow fighter jet that Canada developed. It's all there. It's just sometimes, as you say, we get to be a bit more complacent than we should be. We all tend to be, of course, naturally. But also in Israel, it doesn't really take a war to change our mindset. When we understood that artificial intelligence can be introduced to our lives, one hospital in Tel Aviv, for example, vacated a whole floor and brought in AI experts who had no idea whatsoever about medicine, but were all geniuses in AI.
and they all got their offices there, and they told these guys, walk around in hospital and see what you can automate and see what difference you can make for us. That's out of the box thinking. That is what it takes. And this comes from mitigating COVID-19 in Israel. The same hospital director who was very successful in mitigating the COVID in his hospital, and also actually had an impact on whole of Israel. He was the one to do this. So we learn lessons all of our lives. The question is, how open are we to them, and how much are we willing to take risks, calculated risk, or not? But this is a sort of a jump, that a leap of faith that we have to make in our lives, and everybody does that at some point, and everybody's capable of. I mean, Israel is not any smarter than anybody else, although we, of course, would love to think that, but of course we're not. So what I think my role is to bring together people who in Israel have had interesting ideas to collect whatever resources they have in front of them to solve problems in an interesting way and give inspiration to others, just as we learn from Canadians in AI and in any other field. There is so much to learn from each other, just that not all of us are always able or willing, have the bandwidth to think out of the box. But we know that we actually should be doing that most of the time, because if you really want to make a difference, we have to make a difference. And that's getting out of normal patterns and think differently. So I've seen, ample evidence of that here in Canada. I visited Montreal AI cluster, and I was just flabbergasted to see how they work and think and what they have to offer. And I'm just trying to entice them to come to meet Israeli companies and visit Israel. This summer, we have a huge conference. It's called AI Week at the University of Tel Aviv. There are so many ways for us to collaborate. We understand, being a small country, what the advantage is of working with other partners around the world. Maybe that is the big difference between Israel and Canada. But I can tell you that
no one would mistake Canada for a small country. Small in population, but not tiny.
Israel big, yeah, that's true. There is actually discrepancies there between the size. It's one of the least populated countries in the world, Canada. But we have great collaboration.
To be fair, lots of it's very cold. So, you wouldn't want to.
I can talk about the cold. I enjoy the cold very much. I can tell you that.
But then you got the right posting.
But anyway, we can learn a lot from each other. We have that experience in Israel. We have learned how to gain access to new markets in Far East and in Europe and in Eastern side of Europe, in Africa. And that's also something we'd love to share with Canadian counterparts. And therefore, just to say why I enjoy Calgary so much, I've been there last year to Stampede, and it was just amazing. I mean, I love the atmosphere, and I like the approach of can-do, and the way that, and just having meetings in jeans and boots. That's a refreshment for me as diplomats. You see me always with a tie, but no, that can be done differently.
Everybody's got to make the Stampede circuit at least once. It's the fun circuit, and when we're talking about can-do attitude, I take some credit, because I do think that Alberta is probably the heart of that kind of spirit here in Alberta. But then I'm allowed to be biased in that direction. Well, anyway, thank you very much for joining me, Ambassador. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I thought that was a really interesting conversation. So I hope to be able to speak again soon. And if you are making the Stampede circuit again this year, I hope to see you too.
Look forward to that. I will be there this summer, and thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
And again, if you haven't already, do like and subscribe that button, and do check us out at www.readtheline.ca.